Chapter 5. Adrian was halfway through reviewing a ledger when a knock sounded on his door. Without looking up, he said, "Come in." The door opened quietly. A man stepped inside wearing a crisp white military uniform, several medals gleaming across his chest. His pale skin, striking phoenix-purple eyes, and long blonde hair tied neatly into a ponytail gave him the sort of appearance that made people turn their heads instinctively when he entered a room. Adrian, however, did not. He continued scanning the columns of numbers, pen tapping lightly against the margin. The man sauntered over and leaned over Adrian's shoulder, studying the document. Adrian's pen stopped. Slowly, he turned his head and fixed the intruder with a flat stare. "Keith." Keith smiled as if caught doing something entirely reasonable. "What?" he said lazily. "I was curious." He straightened and gestured toward the ledger. "His Majesty gave you quite a generous wedding gift, didn't he? And with the Whitemore Alliance opening the capital's treasury to you." He walked around the desk and dropped into the chair opposite Adrian. "You're significantly wealthier than you were a few weeks ago." Adrian shut the ledger with a quiet thud. "If you're here to borrow money," he said calmly, "you should consider marrying a rich alpha instead." Keith blinked. Then he scoffed. "Wow, I ride across half the kingdom and this is the welcome I get. You still haven't denied it." Keith leaned back in his chair, crossing one leg over the other. "For your information," he said with exaggerated dignity, "I am not here to take a loan." A pause. "I came to congratulate you." Adrian raised an eyebrow. "Congratulations, Duke Blackwood." Adrian studied him for a moment. "If that's true," he said, "where's the gift?" Keith clicked his tongue. "Wouldn't it be more appropriate to present it to both you and the Duchess?" Adrian leaned back in his chair, already looking tired of the conversation. "Don't tell me you rode all the way here just to say that." Keith pressed a hand dramatically to his chest. "You wound me," he said. "I missed your wedding. The least I could do was offer my congratulations in person." He shrugged. "I left the moment I heard you'd returned to Audiesi." Adrian's expression softened slightly. Keith only made long journeys for two reasons, trouble or loyalty. Usually both. "I know the whole thing happened suddenly." Keith let out a short laugh. "Suddenly?" he said. "You didn't just get married. You practically chained yourself to the capital." Adrian's gaze drifted back to the closed ledger. Outside the window, the banners of House Blackwood shifted in the wind above the fortress walls. Keith leaned forward, voice lowering. "They're trying to anchor you to imperial politics. You see that, right?" Of course he did. The war had nearly emptied Blackwood's coffers. The Empire didn't know the exact extent of it, but the Emperor had informants everywhere. And Adrian's victories had made him noticeable. Victorious generals rarely stayed comfortable for long. "Marriage into Whitemore," Keith continued. "Imperial funds, court connections. That's not generosity." Adrian exhaled quietly. "I'm aware." Odysseus sat on the kingdom's frontier like a blade pointed toward its enemies. Whoever held the city held the border. The Emperor would never leave something like that untouched. Keith watched him carefully. "You could have refused." Adrian shook his head once. "No." He thought of the soldiers who followed him into battle. The farmers rebuilding their homes after the war. The merchants who kept the city alive. People who trusted House Blackwood. Refusing would have been easier, but it wouldn't have protected them. "If the Emperor wants influence here," Adrian said calmly, "then he'll have it." Keith frowned. "That sounds suspiciously like surrender." Adrian allowed a faint smile. "It's called compromise." Keith stared at him for a moment before snorting. "Your ancestors are definitely haunting you right now. They've been doing that for generations." Keith leaned back again and shook his head. "Only you would survive a war, defeat 3 enemy generals, and then lose to politics." Adrian picked up his pen again. "I haven't lost." Keith raised an eyebrow. Adrian's gaze hardened slightly as he reopened the ledger and continued. "I'm just playing a longer game." "So," Keith said after a moment, tilting his head slightly, "how is your spouse?" Adrian paused. For a brief moment, His expression shifted. Something thoughtful, almost uncertain, crossing his face. "He's not what I expected," Adrian said after a short hesitation. Keith's brows lifted with immediate interest. "Oh," he drawled. "That sounds promising." Adrian ignored the tone. His thoughts drifted, unbidden, to Elias, to the way Elias had gradually relaxed in his presence. The tension in his shoulders easing as the evening went on. To the quiet glances he thought Adrian hadn't noticed. But Adrian had. There had been curiosity in those looks, and something else beneath it. A faint scent of attraction, subtle, tentative, carefully masked, yet impossible for Adrian not to notice. Keith leaned forward slightly. "Well?" he said, a grin already forming. "You can't say something like that and then stop there." Adrian exhaled quietly. "I'm still figuring him out." It was already dawn when Adrian and Keith finally stepped out of the watchtower. The sky above Audiesi was washed in pale gold, the first light of morning stretching across the fortress walls. Adrian had invited Keith to stay at Blackwood Castle, and the two of them soon mounted their horses, accompanied by a small group of soldiers. They rode through the quiet roads of the waking city. After nearly an hour, the towering gates of Audiesi appeared ahead. The guards quickly recognized their duke and opened the gates. Adrian slowed his horse as they entered the city, the soldiers following suit. By the time they reached Blackwood Castle, the courtyard had already begun stirring with activity. Adrian dismounted near the main entrance and paused. Elias was standing there. He waited at the entrance with several attendants lined neatly behind him, clearly prepared to welcome Adrian back. The morning light fell across his figure, softening his features. For a brief moment, something stirred inside Adrian. He couldn't quite name it. Benjamin stepped forward first, bowing respectfully. The attendants followed suit. Adrian acknowledged them with a small nod before his gaze returned to Elias. But then he noticed something that immediately soured his mood. Elias wasn't looking at him. His attention had shifted behind Adrian to Keith. There was a clear sparkle in Elias's eyes, bright and unmistakable. Adrian's expression darkened slightly. Elias stepped forward and bowed politely. "Welcome back." Before Adrian could respond, Keith moved beside him with effortless ease, smiling as if he had been waiting for this moment. "Elias," Adrian said, his tone composed, "there is someone I'd like you to meet." He gestured toward the man beside him. "This is Marquis Keith Moore. He is one of my closest confidants and will be staying with us tonight." Right on cue, Keith bowed gracefully. When he straightened, he extended his hand toward Elias. Elias hesitated only briefly before placing his hand in Keith's. Keith lifted it and pressed a light kiss against the back of it. "Congratulations on your wedding, Lord Elias Blackwood," Keith said warmly. "I've brought a small gift to celebrate the occasion. I hope you'll accept it." Elias looked almost radiant. For years, Marquis Keith Moore had been someone he admired, a name spoken often in stories of the Empire's most brilliant strategists and most charming nobles. Never in his life had he imagined meeting the man like this, much less as his husband's guest. But Adrian saw something entirely different. From where he stood, all he noticed was the way Elias's eyes shone as he looked at Keith. And for reasons he couldn't quite explain, Adrian found himself frowning. It was dinner time, all three of them gathered in the dining hall. Elias was quiet as usual and Adrian and Keith were discussing their politics as usual. After the dinner, Elias excused himself. "He is definitely not what I had thought him to be," said Keith. "What do you mean?" Adrian narrowed his eyes and said. Keith said defensively, "I meant I was expecting a puppet or something, but I don't such aura from him. He seems genuine. Maybe they think that he is obedient, but turned out he has his own free will. Still, I can't let my guard down," said Adrian. It was only after past 12 that both of them decided that it's too late and decided to retire to their room. When Adrian was walking past the corridor, he caught a familiar smell of orchid, to which he turned towards the window and caught a sight of blonde in near the fountain. Elias couldn't sleep. After wandering aimlessly through the quiet halls of the castle, he had eventually stepped outside, drawn by the cool night air. Now he sat on the marble edge of the fountain, the soft sound of water filling the silence around him. The events of the day replayed in his mind. Their meeting, the moment Adrian had stepped down from his horse, composed, distant, as always. And then, Keith. Elias let out a quiet breath. Marquis Keith Moore. Someone he had admired from afar for years. Someone people spoke of with ease and admiration, as if brilliance came naturally to him. And Adrian stood beside him just as effortlessly. Close. Familiar. Elias lowered his gaze. Throughout dinner they had spoken like that. Like people who understood each other without trying. It shouldn't have bothered him. But it did. Just slightly. At the same time, Adrian's presence lingered in his thoughts. The way his gaze had rested on him, even if only briefly. The way he had said his name. Elias frowned faintly. He didn't understand it. Not yet. A soft sound of footsteps approached. Elias stilled. He didn't need to turn to know who it was. The scent gave him away. But he didn't turn around. "You're still awake," Adrian said. Elias let out a small breath, as if steadying himself, before replying. "So are you." Adrian stopped a few steps behind him. For a moment, neither spoke. The sound of water filled the silence. Then Elias finally turned. His gaze lifted and met Adrian's. There it was again. That same look Adrian had noticed before. Careful, curious, and something else. Something warmer, harder to name. "You should be resting," Adrian said, his tone quieter than before. Elias tilted his head slightly. "You were with Marquis Moore." It wasn't a question. Adrian's eyes narrowed just a fraction. "Keith," he corrected. Elias hesitated, then nodded. "Keith." A pause. "He seems close to you." The words were measured, but there was something beneath them. Adrian stepped closer. "We've known each other a long time." Elias's fingers tightened slightly against the edge of the marble. "I can tell." There was no accusation in his voice, but there was something else. Something that made Adrian's chest feel tight. "And you admire him," Adrian said. Elias blinked, caught off guard. He stopped, then looked away briefly. "He's someone I've heard about for years," Elias admitted. "Anyone would be impressed." Adrian studied him. The honesty in his voice, the absence of calculation, and yet, that look from earlier returned to Adrian's mind. The way Elias had looked at Keith, the way his eyes had lit up. Adrian stepped closer again. Too close now. Elias stilled. "You were looking at him," Adrian said quietly. Elias's breath hitched. "I was. Like you were seeing something you liked." The words came out more bluntly than Adrian intended. Silence fell between them. For a moment Elias just stared at him. Then something in his expression shifted. Not embarrassment, not guilt, something sharper. "And you weren't?" Elias asked softly. Adrian frowned. "What does that mean?" Elias stood up. Now they were standing face to face, barely a step between them. "At dinner," Elias said, his voice steady but low. "You spoke with him the entire time." Adrian didn't respond. "You barely looked at me." That landed. Adrian hadn't expected that. Elias's gaze didn't waver. "You seemed very comfortable," he continued. "With him." There it was. Not accusation. Not quite. But something undeniably close. Adrian exhaled slowly. "Keith is important to you," Elias finished. Adrian's jaw tightened. "Yes." A beat of silence. "And I'm not?" Elias asked. The question was quiet. Too quiet. Adrian's chest felt heavier than it should have. "That's not what I said. But it's what you showed." Elias's voice didn't rise. If anything, it softened, which made it worse. Adrian reached out before he could think better of it. His fingers caught Elias's wrist. Lightly, but enough to stop him from stepping back. Elias froze. The contact was brief, simple, but neither of them moved. Adrian's grip wasn't tight, just there. Elias's gaze dropped to where Adrian held him. Then slowly he looked back up. Something in his expression shifted again. The tension didn't disappear. It changed. Softer. Closer. Adrian became aware, very suddenly, of how close they were standing. Of the faint scent of orchids surrounding Elias. Of the way Elias wasn't pulling away. If anything, he leaned in just slightly, almost unconsciously. Adrian's breath slowed. Elias's gaze flickered briefly to his lips, then back to his eyes. That small movement didn't go unnoticed. It lingered between them, an unspoken question, possibility, 2 weeks of distance, restraint, and unacknowledged tension narrowing into a single moment. Adrian didn't move, neither did Elias, but the space between them felt thinner now, fragile. Elias's fingers curled slightly, as if resisting the urge to close the distance himself. And for a moment, Adrian almost let him. Almost. Then, he let go. The absence of contact felt immediate. Sharp. Adrian stepped back. Just one step. But it was enough. Elias stilled. Something in his expression faltered. Quick, subtle, but unmistakable. Adrian looked away first. "You should rest," he said quietly. The distance was back. Deliberate this time. Elias didn't respond right away. When he did, his voice was softer than before. "Of course." Adrian didn't look at him again. He turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing faintly against the stone. Behind him, the sound of the fountain continued, steady, unchanged. Elias remained where he was, still, silent, and just slightly hurt.